Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
What do you mean you've seen this? It's brand new.
Well, a new year and a new Formula 1 game, and thanks to Codemasters and EA Sports, I'm taking a look at this year's entry in the series with F1 24. But are the yearly F1 games starting to get a little bland, say like the yearly releases in FIFA, NBA, and the Call of Duty franchise? Firstly, before we start, F1, for those of you who don't know, is the only sport I watch. I'm not interested in the NBA or FIFA or Moto GP, and hell, I couldn't even really care about our own Australian football in AFL.
Oh, that's it. I'm gonna report this to me Member of Parliament.
So naturally, the only yearly sports game I'm interested in is Formula 1. But having been a fan of the sport since 2019 and picking up the yearly F1 games, I've not yet really experienced any fatigue when it comes to sport entries that some other gamers may be familiar with. But this may be my first entry in the series that, yes, keeps me engaged and entertained, but also maybe not disappointed, but a bit deflated. But before we get into my thoughts on this year's release, F1 24 is developed by Codemasters and published by EA Sports, and is the only officially licensed F1 video game properly available on the market, so there's no 2K Formula 1 or any other competitors similar to that. But F1 24 has most fans experience the speed and strategy of driving a F1 car that we, players, will never get to do in real life.
I won't be able to do it.
Oh, come on, you'll miss out on our day out.
Well, what do you want me to do?
Be less fat. It's quite easy.
Obesity is an illness.
Yeah, but it's a big fat illness though, isn't it? Big fat heavy illness.
The overall gameplay is pretty simple in, well, that it's a racing game. Well, duh. But it is fast-paced, but it isn't always necessarily about going fast. I mean, well, that is a massive factor of the game, but there is the strategy of tyres, when to go into the pits, when to conserve energy, and well, depending on what track you're on, you can sort of lock yourself into a position, as some tracks are nearly impossible to overtake on. But this year's entry in the series, Codemasters have made changes to suspension and the aerodynamics of cars, as well as some track updates, some real driver updates, and some niceties in the career mode.
Now let's burn rubber, baby! Speedway Squad, in colour.
Now, I've done 90% of my playing of F1 24 on my Thrustmaster T SXW hub with the Ferrari SF1000 wheel in my next level racing cockpit, and I gotta say, the gameplay is smooth. Now, the steering does feel responsive, and the handling has been adjusted with this year's entry with the new suspension changes to the car, as well as aerodynamic modelling. Now, I have seen some professional Formula 1 content creators have some problems with this, and by no means am I a professional F1 content creator.
Meanwhile...
Fucking little bastard!
But I did find, maybe due to the suspension changes, I wasn't getting penalised as much for hitting, say, sausage curbs like I was in F1 23. Now, there were multiple times in my playthrough of F1 23 where if I hit a curb so hard, I would do damage to the floor or I would beach myself, and that wasn't really a thing here for me in this entry, at least during my playthrough so far. The first thing I did notice that you might have seen in my impressions video was that I wasn't kicking out of corners like I was in F1 23. Now, previously in F1 23, when applying too much acceleration on a corner, your rear end would kick out, so naturally it would teach you to ease on the accelerator, even if you had traction control 100% turned on. This year though, that isn't a problem. With traction control turned on, you can just plant your feet into the corners and you won't miss anything, and it sort of sometimes feels like I'm playing F1 22 in some regards. Now, Codemasters have added improved tyre model to the game where the tyres are enhanced with temperatures and their behaviour, and again, I'm not a pro gamer at the game, and this is something that I noticed while doing career mode with my brother. Now, during the opening race in Bahrain, I noticed that my mediums were pretty worn in pretty badly, and I couldn't brake properly, I couldn't turn properly, and on rumbles, I was kicking out. But as soon as I changed to a fresh set of softs, I was hugging corners and retaining a lot of speed and a lot of grip.
No shit.
Now previously in F1 23 and 22 before it, I've used a set of mediums for an extensive amount of time and only pitting when I absolutely had to, because most races require you to run 2 tyre compounds, and without overly noticing a difference in my sort of handling or braking at that time. But this year the tyres do, to me at least, feel like they play a bit more of a difference, especially when running old and worn tyres and moving on to some fresh ones. The biggest thing for me though that actually kind of surprised me was the aerodynamic modelling of the cars. Now, playing on the lower side of the hard difficulty, so around that 60 mark, my brother and I aren't the greatest drivers, but we could at least last year pull away from the grid with no real problems. Where this time around we were pulling away from the tractors that are the Alpines, no problem, but we noticed that Alex Albon in the Williams and their straight line speed was something that kept us on our toes, and it wasn't just the AI in regards to Alex Albon being a great driver, it was the aerodynamics of the Williams itself. Each car here feels like it has a signature or special ability, if you will, with its aerodynamics. The Red Bulls and Max would ace the launch from the start, and the Kick Saubers would provide some actual challenges in the midfield too. Now the AI in the game during my preview testing didn't feel murderous compared to sort of previous entries in the series, but that's not the case when running side by side with someone say like Lance Stroll. Now, during my co-op career in Jeddah, we started at the back of the grid, and no shit, Lance Stroll does his iconic or dangerous squeezing technique to the point where he'll completely try to take you out. And I kind of want to say, whoever did the AI programming, they did pretty damn well with Lance.
Is the trick? Is it on now? Okay, I'm not...
F1 24 does give us some updates to 4 circuits with Spa, Silverstone, Losail in Qatar, and Jeddah. Now the first immediate one I noticed was Spa and Silverstone, where on some corners I could ride the curb or get around the corners pretty tightly, where last year I couldn't really do this. Spa's had some changes to its runoff areas as well, making some corners a bit more dangerous if you go wide, and playing with a set of headphones on, hearing your tyres kick up some gravel will tighten your sphincter. Silverstone has had some changes too, where Codemasters have claimed you'll feel every bump and curb on the track. But as I mentioned, with how I felt the suspension changes made the car react, say, less to curbs, I couldn't overly feel them, at least not on my steering wheel setup. I did, however, play this on a controller, and I could feel the ground and vibrations and the curbs, and yeah, it was impressive on a controller. But on my wheelbase, it kind of feels like the standard feedback with a couple of little effects here and there. This could be different though if you're using one of those motion-rigged platforms, or if you're a pro with no assists on at all, but I'll get back to these suspension changes. But this year we've got the option to play as real drivers on the grid in career modes, and we can play as Lewis Hamilton to try and get his 8th Drivers' Championship, which to be fair won't happen this year because of that Mercedes. Or we can race as Lance Stroll and see if we can get fired from Aston Martin, which surely there has to be some kind of coding in the game that won't really allow that to happen. But with driving as real F1 drivers, you get to hear the voice of the real F1 driver. If you cross the line in the points as Valtteri Bottas, you'll hear Bottas.
Good job with the strategy and everything. Thank you. That's the first one. More to come.
If you win as Lewis, you'll hear him thank the hard workers at the factory.
Amazing job. I'm so grateful. Everyone back at the factory, everyone working so hard.
Or if you get a win as Daniel Ricciardo, you will hear him, and these clips are pulled straight from the helmet and radio dialogue from real racers, and they aren't the same clips being used over and over again, which I thought was pretty rad.
So sorry.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
I can't turn the car. I crashed.
Graphically, well, as you can expect, F1 24 looks better than last year's entries, with updated character models, car models, and even small things like dirt, gravel and grass on your car as you generally drive around, and it is pretty impressive. We've got the option to drive as more F1 icons as well as the return of F2 cars, but my brother and I found something interesting that we've not seen in previous F1 games before, at least in our experience, and that's with license ratings for multiplayer. Previously, when it came to playing with my brother or with mates, we just do private lobbies, and we did that this time round to get some races in and have a bit of fun, and we noticed that we were getting points or accolades for driving clean, which would then increase our license. If we drove like Lance Stroll or Esteban Ocon at Monaco though, it would negatively affect our license, and I thought this was a great addition to the game, or something that I've personally not noticed, and it would also help those who want to play F1 with mates and avoid having the game turn into Mario Kart, where one player thinks it's funny to ram each other off the road.
Podium, boys. Is that a podium? That's a podium. Yeah, nice shot there.
Each year we've got a career mode with some general updates and changes, and it looks like every 2 years we get that Breaking Point storyline that comes into play. As we've got Breaking Point last year, this year it's just general menu and hub updates, which yeah, we sort of get that with every year. Firstly, we can play career mode though as existing F1 drivers or our own custom F1 driver. Playing as our custom character is pretty straightforward and similar to previous games. You can opt to drive into Formula 2 and work your way into Formula 1, or you can skip and go straight into Formula 1. You'll pick your team, who your partner will be for the team, and if you pick something like say Haas, your goal or requirements for how you perform will be easier than say joining Red Bull or Mercedes, where they expect results during each race. We're driving as a real Formula 1 driver rather than starting as a low overall average score custom character. You can then play as an experienced driver like say Hamilton, where his accolades or goals will be different to those if you're playing as a custom character. Hamilton will obviously have win his 8th Drivers' Championship as his main goal, Ricciardo will have one saying get in the top 3 of the championship points, and Lance Stroll has learned how to drive. Now whether you're playing as your own custom character or an existing Formula 1 driver, the career mode will start with your chosen driver signing the contract with their manager, and I don't know dude, I kinda like this. Career modes can be a bit bland and boring outside of the racing, and yes, I understand saying the gameplay outside of the racing in a racing game is bland, but this intro was kinda cool to the point where it felt a bit more personal, if that makes sense. We sit down with our manager who helps us sign our contract and goes through the contract in some details. But there's the standard career mode, the co-op career mode, where yes, you and a mate can play in proper co-op career where you both move together from team to team, or in contracts mode where if you're doing better or worse than your partner, you can actually swap teams and race against each other, which is kinda cool. We also have the return of the My Team mode, where you play as the 11th team on the grid, a team which we know Formula 1 won't allow because, well, look at Andretti. They'll allow 3 races in the US, but they won't allow a US team with a US-made engine. But the career mode also has secret meetings and secret offerings from other teams trying to recruit you with its updated manager system, and it kind of immerses you into being an actual Formula 1 driver, something that a lot of us will never be. One of the biggest things that was a letdown for me here in F1 24 was the customization and custom characters. If like me you've been playing F1 games year after year, you'll know that the custom driver options for faces are the same since I think 2019 or 2020 from memory, with there being no real difference besides graphical changes. Helmets, suits and the casual clothes that you can equip are exactly the same from 2 to 3 years ago. The F1 home customization that you could previously do with the hypercars in different rooms, that's all gone now, which was a weird customization option. Oh yeah, and the hypercars are gone too, which I don't really think anyone really used or wanted, so that's fair. But the personalization of you as a driver is lacking, and it's lacking kinda hard. Previously, when booting up F1 23 for the first time, you'd had maybe 5 or so different helmets to choose from and customize, so there were some general options to give yourself a bit of flair while racing. Last year too, we had the helmet store, so there were options to go into if you wanted to spend microcurrency, which are the pit coins, to buy a flashy helmet. However, when booting up F1 24 for the first time, there was one helmet to use and customize, with 3 in the store that cost Pitcoin credits, and none of those helmets personally had me racing to buy them. Chatting with my brother while we started our F1 co-op career, we had a pretty damn cool idea, and that's that each console or PC player has different options when it comes to helmet customization. PC players can import photos and make their own helmet. For example, I could use my YouTube logo, put in some fake sponsors, and well, customize and create my own helmet. As for PlayStation and Xbox not being able to perhaps import images to the console to create their own helmets, each respective console should get its own special helmets. PlayStation players would get, say, God of War, Days Gone, Last of Us PlayStation exclusive titles that are themed for their helmets, and Xbox players would have the exact same thing with Halo, Gears of War, Sea of Thieves, and so on. So while PC can craft and create their own unique helmets for their drivers, console players get to use exclusive helmets that are linked to the console that they're playing on.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but that's not a bad idea.
Hey! Hey! Steering wheel, somebody tell him to give it to me.
But well, how accessible is F1 24 and how does it feel on a controller? Well, the racing does feel good on a controller, but I did find it harder to control the car around corners. As you can see, the steering wheel does jerk back and forth rather than the precision of using a steering wheel. But the vibrations of the track feel great on a controller, and after a handful of races, I was getting used to it. Now, I played this with a PlayStation 5 controller and a Xbox Elite controller with the option to tighten the sticks on the Elite controller and clip on the rear paddles. It really comes in handy for controlling the car and shifting gears, I will say. But is it easy to play? Yes, it is easy to play, by meaning it is easy to pick up, have the assist turn on and learn how to play the game. But F1 games do take some time to master and learn, and that might not be everyone's cup of tea. F1 games, while yes, they can be fun, I definitely know some of my mates who aren't a fan of these kinds of games because it does take time to learn and even longer to master. Hell, each year I do take an assist off, so I'm slowly learning this year how to use the anti-lock braking or turning that off, or the pit lane assist and turning that off, and naturally, if you know how to drive with assists off, you will drive a lot faster than your mates who have never played the game before and maybe have assists on. I will say though, if you even have a passing interest of F1, or you like the Drive to Survive series, then you'll enjoy these F1 games. I've honestly loved learning more about the sport, about ERS, DRS, tyre strategy, racing incidents, that a few years ago I was able to properly actually watch the sport and have a conversation with my dad about what's going on. Now, F1 is the sport that me and my dad share, and a lot of that is due to the F1 Codemasters games teaching me about the sport. But, well, what do I think of F1 24? It feels like a bit of a filler game sometimes, as the sport this year does feel like it's going down the repetitive slope that is Max wins, come back next week to see Max win. Yes, I understand Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris have just won their respective races as well, but it does sort of feel a bit the same when you're watching the actual sport. The changes though in the game to the suspension modelling and the handling don't feel like too much of a difference, at least to me. Nothing is immediately sticking out. But the track changes to Silverstone, Spa, Jeddah and Lusail are pretty damn cool. I found myself loving the options to ride some corners and having to be wary of closer gravel traps, and it kind of immersed me and had me feeling more like an F1 driver, and I was kind of impressing myself as how quick I was actually going around the track. The customization and the options to personalise your car and your driver are lacking, yeah. But when it comes down to it as well, the customization is a side extra to the racing. The real driver radios are great, and the fact that they don't just repeat the same radio over and over again was actually really refreshing. This entry will keep me entertained for a year, just like most yearly release sports games, but more so it had me asking what F1 25 will look like, and no doubt F1 25 will have me asking what F1 26 looks like. But so far, the graphics are great, the cars are fast, and if you've enjoyed previous entries from Codemasters, you'll most likely enjoy this one too, I'll say. Finally, VR does return, but I'll be covering this in a separate video or during my F1 co-op gameplay that I'll be doing with my brother. But whether you've been a fan of Formula 1 since Kimi Raikkonen sculled a bottle of champagne on the podium, or your favourite driver is George Russell for whatever reason, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.